Hello Popcorn Junkies, welcome to this review of The Long Walk, a brand new film from the mind and the pen of Stephen King. He's a versatile writer and storyteller, isn't he? Stephen King, if you think about it, you know, from the obvious horror films through to things like The Shawshank Redemption and Stand By Me. Misery was horror, but it was kind of real horror, wasn't it? It was a real person, so he's not just horror stories. But yeah, but Stephen King, I mean, he's quite something. Anyway, this is called The Long Walk, and this is a film that stars Cooper Hoffman, he of Licorice Pizza, David Jonsson from Rye Lane and Alien Romulus and what have you, and a whole host of other young male actors in there, alongside a incredibly gruff, angry, growling sergeant in the form of Mark Hamill. Now, the concept for this film is pretty simple and straightforward, and when you get to grips with the concept, it's no surprise that the director, Francis Lawrence, is someone who made the Hunger Games. If you think of the Hunger Games, people get put forward, don't they, from certain awards, and then you go to the Hunger Games and you have a winner, and that winner kind of, you know, is the one winner, and it's kind of, you know, survival of the fittest and to the, you know, fight to the death and all that kind of stuff. Well, this is that sort of thing, but this is a walk till you're dead type film. You know, basically different youngsters, they are entered into a lottery and they win the right and they win the prize of partaking in the Long Walk, which is a competitive walk that has no end, knows no distance, and simply all of the young men in this walk have to keep walking. And if they drop beneath 3 miles an hour, they will get a warning, and then they'll get a second warning, a third warning. And then if they are still beneath 3 miles per hour, or if they try and go off the road, or if they try to attack the soldiers escorting them, they will be summarily executed. So this is very much a dystopian sci-fi horror film, and I have to confess, I thought going in knowing that this was about a bunch of, you know, seen the trailer, you know, there's going to be one, and there can only be one winner. So you know from the get-go that you're basically entering a film or sitting down to watch something in which you're going to watch the lion's share of anyone you identify with, relate to, or like die. We have Cooper Hoffman's character, Raymond, is very much our way in. He's the kind of first person almost that this is about. We see a little bit of him with his mum before the start of the race, signing up, heading to the starting line. He meets all these other boys, all these other young men. They're all kind of keen. None of them seem particularly perturbed by the idea that inevitably most of them are going to die. And I think where this film becomes most interesting is in the sort of almost deceptively simple conceit of the walk, and that there can only be one winner, and that they just must simply keep walking over 3 miles an hour for as long as they can until there's one winner. It's so deceptively simple. It then kind of becomes one of the most, actually, weirdly, one of the most thought-provoking existential films to have come out of Hollywood, I think, in quite a long time. You know, watching this, that most of these young men are going to die. And in a weird way, that's symbolic, because it's like life. We're going to become attached to them, we're going to care for them, we're going to hate some of them, we're going to want some of them to die because, yeah, they're not particularly pleasant, or they're horrible, or they're vicious, all this kind of stuff. But either way, as we go into the film, you're sort of engaging with all the stuff of life. Now, when I went in to see this film, I was going through, or we are going through some particularly difficult times with members of our families and things like that, and the frail and the vulnerable, and people talking about ideas of end of life and things like that. So I watched this film, and I have to confess, by the end of it, I had cried a lot. And it's not because it's necessarily sentimental. It isn't. I would actually argue that this is incredibly shocking and vicious and violent and aggressive too, because yes, in a weird way, this is like Stand By Me. You know those wonderful shots of all the boys at River Phoenix all walking along the kind of, you know, the railway tracks, chatting, and the music playing and all that kind of stuff, and they're sort of chatting about nothing, and they're chatting about something, and they're just shooting the breeze. They're kind of talking about girls, they're talking about sport, they're talking about food, they're talking about their families. No one's really taking stuff too seriously, and yet everything that kind of affects you is so serious because you're young and you're a teenager and you're a boy and all that kind of stuff. So we followed it. We go into this with Cooper Hoffman. Cooper Hoffman, Philip Seymour Hoffman's son, he was fantastic in Licorice Pizza. This film basically lives or succeeds based on the performances, really, of the entire cast of youngsters. Cooper Hoffman is very powerful. He's very sort of competent, confident, vulnerable. I mean, interestingly, his character in the film, a little bit like Cooper Hoffman's in real life, his dad has been taken away. We discover later in the film he was shot by the authorities. And he befriends quite quickly David Jonsson's character, and they become quite close. We meet many of the others. There's Hank, who's played by Ben Wang. He's really good, sort of shuffling. So we become invested. It's young men. This is very much young men. The only female character in this film is Cooper Hoffman's mum. The concept's dark. It's simple, it's dystopian. Where are we? We're sort of in a 1960s America. I thought the setting of this film was intriguing because on the one hand, you felt orientated in terms of the vehicles, the cars, the time, the era, and then you felt sort of slightly dislocated, like could this be a time in the future, or there's a futuristic aspect to it too. The soldier, the major, is played by Mark Hamill. Yes, he who plays Luke Skywalker. And if I had one overarching major criticism, which I'm saying now because it kicked in the first time he opened his mouth, Mark Hamill is a nice guy in real life, you see. And he's an actor, so of course he should be able to play horrible. But the major was a bit too obviously stereotypically gruff and barking in his kind of orders and gravelly and unsympathetic, and he had these shades on, and I found him too much of a kind of archetype. I think the character of the major needed a little bit more light and shade even to his, if you like, evil. I mean, he's not necessarily evil because he's just running the show. He's kind of, but he's shouting at them, he's saying, one of you will be a winner and all this kind of stuff. I didn't feel Mark Hamill nailed it. I'm really sorry. And it was a real problem for me because in a weird way, he becomes the sort of the target of all these young boys' kind of fury and frustration and anger. That pays off in a big way at the end. He really is the focal point of Cooper Hoffman's fury and anger too. But I just didn't think Mark Hamill carried it. It was almost like, even in his voice, even in his shades, he didn't quite fill the uniform. And that was a problem because he quite literally in this also didn't fill the uniform. He didn't occupy or inflate and instill that kind of dark, militaristic, faceless part of the society that you're trying to kind of escape. He didn't fill those boots at all, and so I didn't believe it, and I wasn't threatened by him at all. He was it was sort of like a comic. It was like a sort of pantomime villain. But that said, as I say, the whole film, and it's an interesting film to watch in terms of the challenges of filming it, because they're all constantly fucking walking. So the whole film really is a lot of dialogue, very dialogue heavy, lots of discussions, lots of conversations. We delivered David Jonsson's backstory, Cooper Hoffman's backstory. They form a kind of friendship and a closeness and a buddiness. We inevitably get the first sort of one of the group who falls down or is frothing or something happens to them because they can't even do the first sort of 10 miles or 15 miles, and at the point that the first person goes down on the floor and they give them the first warning, they give them the second warning, and when he gets shot, the close range execution of the boys in this film is incredibly disturbing. And I've seen everything and anything, Quentin Tarantino. I found it really quite shocking, and actually something really kicked in with this film which was really quite dark, was as you knew there was the inevitability of all of these youngsters bar one being shot in this way. You both dreaded knowing it was coming. The sound never became tolerable. The really, really loud, large, ricocheting sound of the bullet, the bullet going into them, and the camera doesn't shy away from showing their jaws explode and faces falling apart. At one point, someone's run over by a tank. It's grisly, and that is where the horror aspect of this film comes in. There's a lot of body horror, and it's very violent, and it's made all the more violent, which is why I think it's quite a clever film. It's made all the more violent because, of course, you as the camera, and the camera's handheld, and the camera's moving with them, and it's reverse shot, he's talking, cut to him talking, cut to them at the back. The camera very much becomes essentially one of the competitors walking with them, and so and it doesn't do anything. There's no sort of trickery, there's no big clever whooshing moves or anything like that. Just for great swathes of this film, the camera is just sitting with them and walking along. But that puts us in the position of feeling like we're walking with them. And so the movie moves along, and across the arc of the film, we obviously lose favourite characters. We lose characters that perhaps we are secretly kind of thinking, well, I mean, you don't deserve to survive. But then you realise, actually, even those characters in the film that aren't nice to begin with, you discover further down the way they've got this issue or that issue. So it's a very neat film about character arc, character development, allowing us to get close to those characters that at first we didn't like and thought, quite nice if you just died. We then, of course, as the film proceeds and you get fewer and fewer and fewer of the key characters left, you're kind of almost sitting there with this strange anxiety, thinking, oh no, Ben Wang's character, I don't want Hank to go, I don't want Thomas to go, I don't want Arthur, please don't go. And so you're yearning and you're desperate for them not to fall apart. If there was one part of this that I didn't really get on board with, yes, one of theirs feet gets cut up by their shoes. One of them breaks an ankle and is literally walking on a stump. I found that really quite difficult to watch. Not surprisingly, they slowed down. They did a good job of kind of maintaining the stress around, like at one point, Cooper Hoffman, our lead character, if you like, he slows down for some reason, and then he slows down again and he goes to rescue someone, and he's on his third warning. Once you've got to your third warning, I think there's some rule like you have to walk another 10 miles without another warning in order to wipe the slate clean type thing. The physical degradation of walking, there was one point towards the end of the film, and I think 5 of them are left. And they've walked something like 250 miles. I didn't buy it. I mean, having run ultra marathons and the pain not only you would get in your feet, which they show some of that, but the pain you would get around your nipples. Men's nipples bleed. Even men's nipples bleed when they're running a marathon. The chafing around your balls and your crotch and around your arse and stuff. One thing they don't shy away from is the dilemma of taking a shit. And there is one awful moment in this film where one of the characters has got the bad squits. He's got the terrible runny tummy, and he has to just keep pulling his pants down to kind of take a shit. And they don't shy away from that. And someone does die, gets a bullet in the head whilst taking an awful long time to shit. And that's just such a gruesome and grisly way to go. Now, going back to the kind of setting, this curious kind of blighted, almost depression era kind of America, but it's not the 30s and it's not the 60s. But what you did get as you walked through the wilderness, if you like, of America, were these curious kind of POV panning shots, a POV, the point of view of the walkers, if you like, though, but it's not handheld, it's just like a tracking shot. And you would pass members of this strange dystopian America looking at all the people walking. And I thought this was quite poetic, because in a weird way, these photos look very much like some of those photos of the Dust Bowl and the kind of, the Great Depression across America. But they also look like some of the great sort of rural paintings of American history. These were sort of almost quintessential shots of shutterboard shops and houses and Americans sitting on tractors watching. And there was an impassivity and a coldness and a sort of like almost not there-ness. And so I did feel that in a weird way, this whole film, and I don't know whether this was Stephen King's point really, was a kind of metaphor for the futility of this so-called American dream. You could argue that this whole film, The Long Walk, is about the American dream. Any one of these people could win. And what they win at the end, the last survivor, when there is the last survivor, is they can have whatever they wish. Their greatest wish can be made a reality. And so in a weird way, this film is a distillation of the American dream and it will deliver the American dream, and it does deliver the winning prize, if you like, to one winner. I won't give away who it is. But it also reveals, as a film, the really dark, twisted, empty, depressing underbelly and reality of what that American dream is in order for it to be accomplished, in order for one of these competitors to have it, or gain it, or win it. All these others who've been in the race have to go in order for you to succeed. And I thought in that sense it became a curious kind of portrait or commentary on American society or capitalist society or corporate society. And so all these kind of Americans watching them walk past, they were neither sort of really particularly cheering, though there were a few cheering. They weren't really cheering, but they were almost kind of looking at them in a sort of, I hope you don't really get there sort of way. And then of course the final part, or the final ingredient that makes this film very rich, is really the strength of the relationship between David Jonsson, who's shaping up to be a sensational actor, and Cooper Hoffman. Their friendship, their relationship, their bromance, their desire and their promise to pull each other as far as they could, the way in which David Jonsson's character literally props Cooper Hoffman up when he's falling asleep and he's on his feet and he can't remember, and they're dreaming and they're having nightmares. I mean, they're walking in their sleep. There are times in this where you're thinking, oh my God, this is torturous. This is torturous. I mean, I couldn't help but conflate what they were going through with, you know, the mass forced migrations that we're seeing in Gaza. You know, just imagine the you know, the parallels are just massive here. And of course, watching this film at this time when Gaza City is being cleared and the horrors of the genocide happening in Gaza, you're sort of reminded of just how difficult this is. And then at the center of it, you've got this brotherly kind of relationship, which builds to a really neat conclusion for the end of the film, where you're like, well, yeah, you might keep pulling each other up, but at some point, something's got to give. And I think, again, that's the existential sucker punch of this film, is that you know that there can only be one of them that will get through. And it's entirely surprising, I have to confess, it's entirely surprising who it is that gets, well, there isn't a finish line, but who it is that wins this race. And there's a nice twist at the end in terms of what their wish is, what they've wished for, what their, if you like, what their trophy is. Right at the end is an inversion of what you thought it might be. So it's dark, it's twisted. It also speaks to the joy of human relationships. You see a camaraderie. It speaks to that male friendship and male buddiness. You've got that Stephen King buddy movie thing in here. It's like a road movie, but on foot. I think maybe they missed some of the kind of more gruesome details of what it would have been like to actually walk like this. I would have given one of them asthma, for example. One of them started frothing. A couple of people lose their shit and go mad and just need to get off it. I mean, because that's, you know, imagine thinking, I've just got to keep walking. And I think they didn't introduce, which I think they could have done, but then it might have got a bit too Hunger Gamesy. They didn't introduce enough, competition between them, i.e. any of the members of the pack trying to sabotage one of the others. There is a moment of sabotage, but it's kind of more accidental than intentional. And I wondered whether that thought could have been threaded in, but that would have made it a colder film. Whereas actually by the end of it, you feel compassion for everyone who makes it, doesn't make it, and obviously most of them don't make it. So with all that said and done, the only weakest part of all of it, I think all of the young actors were fantastic in it. All of them, every single one of them, you're rooting for them. I said to Maddie, my daughter, who's a huge empath, this is a nightmare, this film, because you will attach yourself to so many of these youngsters and you'll just be thinking, I mustn't attach myself to them because you're going to die. And I kept going through this oscillating, I mustn't like you. And that's why I kept crying, because I was like, loss. There's a lot of loss in this film. So I would argue this is the most dystopian movie to come out of Hollywood in quite some time. The weakest part of it, unfortunately, is a guy who I love, Mark Hamill. And I thought his character just didn't deliver for us the sense of authority or whatever the society they were in's control of them. He was too paper thin. He wasn't deep enough in his sinister authoritarianism, if you like. So all that said and done, if I was to score this, I'd give this 85 out of 100, but a warning, it's a 15. The gruesomeness of the bullet shots are really, really quite shocking and jarring. I never cease to be jarred with each death that occurs throughout this film. Really interesting film, and given it as such a simple idea, I thought, how can they give us enough variety in something so, in a sense, trapped within a format that just keeps needing to walk? But they did a really successful job of it, I thought, and that really was down to the performances.